Hello, I'm Mark Montgomery. I'm founder and CEO of K-Yield. I wanted to share some thoughts today on how to prevent major catastrophes. It's an area that I've specialized in for decades now, first in consulting at the business level and regional economy level, and then in knowledge systems labs, subsector of AI systems, and networks, global networks, and now AI systems for 23 years, manifest in our K-Yield OS, which prevention has a major component of that. A few years ago, we came up with a program called HUMCAT, which is prevention of human-caused catastrophes, and that is loosely patterned after NatCats, or natural catastrophes, but focusing in on the human-caused or enabled aspect of it with a very strong eye towards prevention and mitigation. And so we've developed systems over the years through our R&D that are quite effective in preventing these types of events, but unfortunately they have not been adopted widely, whether it's in our case or in many other cases. So let's look at the three major catastrophes. The 9/11 event was very preventable. We had one of the commonalities, even though each catastrophe event has similarities, they also commonalities. They're also quite unique in some other ways. So in one of the commonalities is that that you have internal and external experts that warn about it, but the bureaucracies involved, the government regulators, the corporations, if it's a corporate event, management, whether it's denial or whether it's turf battles or some other, or simply just inertia in bureaucratic ability, they don't act in time, or they refuse to act. Now, in the case of 9/11, there was a Phoenix memo. It sat on the servers for weeks before 9/11. If FBI had acted on it, that event could have been prevented, or if they would have shared the information with appropriate other agencies, local, state, and federal agencies. So we had an expert within the FBI that created this memo that was very explicit. His research turned up the actual names of several of the people that were on those planes, unfortunately it just didn't get acted on in time, and 9/11 took place. Now, the 9/11 Commission came out with very explicit suggestions, and one of the other problems was that the information wasn't shared. The FBI system wasn't designed to share that information with anyone else, in part through their own misconception, or even call it an excuse of security. It's not secure at all not to share that type of information with the appropriate other agencies. But in any event, it wasn't set up. So they overhauled the entire intel collection community. And now, for the most part, those problems have been solved. And from what we hear, they're fairly effective in terms of prevention of anti-terrorism and information sharing. But those systems need to be created and designed and created and installed and monitored in a very specific way, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about. Now, the financial crisis, that was systemic, that was quite different, but it also had some commonalities. There were warnings about it. The discrepancy between house affordability and the regional economies was over $1 trillion, and that was before houses started appreciating by 20, 30, and even 50% a year, but the federal regulators wouldn't do anything about it. They denied that it was even a problem, and it was quite obvious. There was systemic fraud that was reported on. Nothing was done. So those are classic examples of failed prevention, and it's also one of the reasons why you can't rely on those actors necessarily to prevent. It needs to come from other sources in a different way. It needs to be independent of politics and political influence, and whether it be internal or external. So with COVID-19, also preventable in a very different way, where if we would have had early warning systems in place, in this case China, that were automated and that reported to the appropriate officials around the world, it would have been possible to use the infectious playbook which is to regionalize and quarantine a region. Now, eventually they did that, but it wasn't caught early enough, and they were already thousands of people a day were flying in and out of the area. So this has been a very well-known risk. It was just a matter of time where this was going to happen. Fortunately for all of us, collectively, COVID has a fairly low fatality rate. So even though there's mass hysteria and a lot of fear about this, and in amazing lockdowns of the entire economy early on, this is really nothing compared to what the worst case scenario would be, and that people have feared for many, many years. The next pandemic could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times more lethal. And similarly, it may spread before, if you don't have the appropriate systems in place, especially, it may spread before with modern transportation airlines before anybody knows it. And once it's spread globally, the infectious disease playbook is no longer valid. I'm sorry to break that to folks, but it no longer is relevant. We need to adapt to that reality. You cannot close the economy down. It causes more deaths in the long run to do that than something at this level of lethality. So what you need to do in these cases is manage the event. And we're doing that now in some respects at the regional level, but it's inconsistent and very poorly managed, and in part because we don't have the information systems in place like we need to. So what do we need to do to prevent these type of events? I won't go too much into the medical side of it because there's others that are better qualified than I am. However, on the systems level, I know precisely what to do. We need to establish what we have in the K-Yield OS, which is, I call a semantic neural network that gives the intelligence at the detail needed, collects the intelligence, processes it in a certain way that's needed, and it's collected from the source, so that you don't have, for example, now in public health, like healthcare more broadly, we have individuals data entry of the data that is one of the reasons why we still have so many errors. This needs to be automated. It needs to be from the source so that we don't have errors and or manipulation. So cover-ups are common. Denial is common. The insider risk is common in all of the major catastrophes. These are things that are common because of political pressures and fear of job loss and associated type influences. And it needs to be monitored in a very specific way. Then we apply advanced AI systems, advanced, for example, deep learning algorithms for certain functions, machine learning for some other functions, and more transparent, genetic algorithms for some functions. So there's a variety of things that you look for, and there's commonalities and patterns in each one of these types of viruses. So you have a coronavirus, we have a lot of information, a lot of detail. There's been several of them that have occurred, and even though this is novel, it's new, it does have a lot of similarities to the previous ones. A lot of knowledge gained. Now we have a lot of knowledge about this. If we were collecting the information in a proper way and could get it out around the world properly, it would save many, many, many more lives, both in terms of the health, the direct health impact, and the economic impact. From which, again, I'm absolutely convinced, based on the evidence that I've seen, that the economic impact is going to kill perhaps 10 times more people in the long run, as directly from COVID. So those are the things that you need in place. You've got to protect. Now, we can't force sovereign nations to adopt these systems, but why isn't the United States adopting these systems? Why aren't individual states? Well, I would submit that the only good reason is that the fear of accountability. They want to control. They want to control the data at the local level. They don't want to give up control. In some cases, they're worried about jobs. And I will just say that is the most ridiculous fear. It's somewhat like this mass hysteria. Nothing has caused more job loss in the last 20 years than massive these catastrophes. The tens of millions of jobs lost due to the financial crisis. Many regions and companies had not recovered when COVID hit, and in this case, we had tens of millions of jobs lost in a matter of weeks in the United States alone. So worldwide, we have depression-level events around the world. Many historic records have been broken in terms of economic impact. So this notion that these types of systems are somehow going to cost jobs is ridiculous. It is the most tragic misunderstanding. And so in any event, it needs to be independent. I think it needs to be done in the private sector. The information needs to be transparent, it needs to be highly secure. In our case, we can bundle, in some cases, bonding to pay for it at the regional level. We can't force other countries to do it, but that shouldn't impact. There's an awful lot that nations can do to protect themselves. There is a fair amount of data available. Even the trends in your own country, if we had the automated systems from the source, for example, we could differentiate between a flu virus, which it's thought by many that the COVID was mistaken for a flu virus early on, wasn't tested. There's some differences. If you had the right information collection across the system, it would be preventable. And then you could isolate these hotspots before it becomes a pandemic and spreads. Once it spreads, the current infectious disease playbook is no longer valid. The economic for a virus of this with this fatality rate intensity, the economic damage is going to be much worse. It's going to cause many more deaths. Now, we've been collectively very lucky in this case. Next time it could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times more lethal. So we literally cannot risk this for happening again with a much more lethal virus. So with that, on Independence Day in the United States, I'll wish my fellow Americans a happy and safe July 4th and Independence Day, and for friends around the world, I wish you peace, good health, and safety. I also hope, for the sake of everyone, that their government entities will partner with firms like ours who have the capabilities to prevent these types of events. Thank you very much.